Ambassador, this is a very special year, believe it or not. China and India, 70th anniversary. What do you make of this relationship now?
Well, you're right. It is we are embarking on the 70th anniversary year of the establishment of diplomatic relations between India and the People's Republic of China. In fact, just 2 days ago, on the 1st of April, yes, our leaders exchanged letters. The presidents wrote to each other, the premiers wrote to each other, the foreign ministers wrote to each other, greeting the people and the governments and the countries on this very important occasion. I think when talking about this 70th anniversary, while it's no doubt important in itself, one must also keep in mind a slightly larger canvas, and that's the canvas of a relationship not only between the relatively young, I would say, nation states that India and the People's Republic of China represent, but also the millennia-old civilizations that India and China represent. And our canvas, therefore, must necessarily be larger. And when one looks at this large canvas through history, one sees that for the longest time, for the most part, this has been an incredibly close, fruitful and productive relationship, which has been marked by a stunning interchange of ideas, of goods, of people, of technologies, of customs, of religions, in fact. And I think that gives this relationship a very special character. Both countries have found a plethora of measures and institutional mechanisms to engage in a productive way. Not only trade and commerce in a very big way, but cultural exchange and cooperation on issues of international concern like climate change. And also that we have found appropriate mechanisms to even deal with issues where we do not necessarily see eye to eye. Broadly, I would say that in India there is recognition that this is a very important relationship. It's important for us bilaterally. It is important for the region. It is important for the world at large, because at the end of the day, we are talking about 40% of the globe's population, 2.7 billion people.
Exactly.
And I think in recent years we have made good progress in developing various aspects of this relationship. And there are high-level engagements at various levels between the two countries, and I would say that President Xi and Prime Minister Modi have made a unique contribution of their own through the mechanism of the informal summits, the first one in Wuhan and the second one in Chennai just a few months ago. And I think while these two summits have been very useful in terms of their concrete outcomes, the first summit, for instance, institutionalized a high-level meeting between the foreign ministers on cultural exchange and people-to-people relations, which I think are an under-addressed part of our bilateral relationship, and we need to do more on that. And the second summit, in fact, underlined the need to institutionalize a high-level meeting, and this is what was agreed between our leaderships in the economic and commercial fields, so something led by Vice Premier from the Chinese side and by our Finance Minister to discuss issues related to trade and commerce, which are again issues that are very important for the relationship. And I think while these substantive outcomes are important in themselves, what is really important is the underlying common understanding between the two leaders that our differences must not be allowed to turn into disputes. And that's, I think, a good understanding on the basis of which to proceed. I think that we both need to see that there are sensitive issues on both sides. If we respect these sensitivities and conduct ourselves accordingly, I think relations will progress, and they are progressing.
It's quite a comprehensive assessment of the latest situation, Mr. Ambassador. Another latest situation It's the global pandemic we're facing now.
Yes.
For a country, a developing country like India with huge population, social distancing would be with quite some challenge. Mr. Ambassador, tell me how your country is trying to practice that and how it works so far. What are some of the challenges and what are some of the solutions you have tested?
As you said, ours is also a large country, an extremely densely populated country. We also have factors such as enormous amount of labor mobility that has happened in recent years as the country has developed economically. And with the onset of these measures of containment, of social distancing, of people not moving around, quarantine and isolation, etc., these aspects have come under a certain amount of pressure. While we also took the same measures that were taken by many other countries in terms of closing schools, closing colleges and universities, educational institutions, cancelling all kinds of events, including religious events, sporting events, major trade events, business conferences, etc. Of course, shutting down almost the entire transportation network except for essential supplies to get from one place to another. But also, I think our leadership realized that eventually what was very important was the fact that people had to be kept where they were. And hence, we came with this unprecedented national sort of lockdown, as it were, to have 1.3 billion people, to the extent possible, stay where they were.
Having said that, though, Mr. Ambassador, what do you think are some of the possibilities of comparing notes between China and India, since you're here in China? And what can we exchange our experiences about and cooperate about?
Well, there is a, I would say, medium to long-term aspect for this cooperation, and
let's look at the immediate, and then we go from there.
Yes, of course, very much. There is an immediate aspect to this cooperation as well, and I think the immediate aspect is to lend a hand in terms of helping and assisting the medical fraternity in India right now, since we are now dealing with this crisis on a war footing, practically. To help them in dealing with this. And what they need in order to deal with this crisis is the provision of an enormous amount of medical kits and medical equipment, not just testing kits, but also personal protective equipment for the people who are at the front line, the doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, the PPE, as they say. And also other medical equipment that is of use, such as ventilators, etc. And I think these are situations that can arise for any country. When China was dealing with this outbreak during the months of January and February, through a process of exchange and interaction, India had provided nearly 16 tons of medical assistance that we flew into Wuhan on one of our aircraft. So there is obviously room for a lot of cooperation. In the present case, of course, what we are doing is we are commercially procuring a lot of this equipment from wherever it is available. China happens to be the country where a lot of this is available. You are one of the largest manufacturers of PPE and ventilators and other such equipment. So I think the immediate priority would be for us to be able to source these in a stable and orderly manner from here, and also for us to keep our freight and cargo lines open so that the material can be transported where it is needed, when it is needed. This, I think, would be what would capture the immediate priority in terms of cooperation between India and China.
And your work these days has a lot to do with every details of this.
It is consumed entirely by this exercise. On a medium to longer term basis, I would say that there is room for India and China to cooperate on the scientific and medical research and development side in the health sector in general, but in this epidemiological side in particular. And I think it would be useful even in the present context for our scientists, for our virologists, for instance, for our national institutes of virology, to be in touch with each other. We could cooperate on issues related to the development of a vaccine, for instance, for this particular virus, or for things that might emerge in the future. I think that scientific research and development collaboration would be of great value, not just to our two countries, but to the world at large, because at the end of the day, we do have very, very large pools of scientific and technological manpower in our two countries.
Right. Last week, the United Nations chief described the pandemic as the most challenging crisis we have faced since the Second World War. The Secretary General called for a coordinated global response to the health threat, with an emphasis on developing nations, reminding countries that we are only as strong as the weakest health system in our interconnected world. Yet, can nations be able to come together to fight against this global pandemic? I asked Ambassador Misri from India about his take. Earlier, there was the very first G20 virtual meeting among the leaders of both developed and developing world, both China and India participating, of course. What do you make of the nature of the outcome, and how do you think they're likely to help us if implemented in an efficient way?
I think given the fact that the G20 countries represent 80% of the global GDP, 60% of global population, more than 90% of the global cases of COVID-19 are in G20 countries, and more than 80% or 85% of the deaths are in G20 countries. There is no other organization that is more, I think, concerned or should be more concerned with this issue than the G20. I think we had good results in terms of the stimulus plan, the undertaking by the leaders to make available up to $5 trillion in order to mitigate the socio-economic costs that have been imposed by this on individuals, on families, on small businesses, on large businesses as well. I think it's useful that there's an understanding also and a commitment to contribute to the WHO-led COVID-19 Solidarity Fund. And I think also there was, coming out of this meeting, an understanding to strengthen the mandate of the WHO itself, to strengthen this organization, that it can be even better prepared in the future to warn the world and warn the international community about these kinds of pandemics.
Mr. Ambassador, of course that would be a very ideal world, but would countries with reality be able to put aside their differences and be able to focus on this a global cooperation against COVID-19?
I think it is essential, because the enemy here is not an individual, a country, a group of countries. It is a virus that doesn't discriminate. And I think it's not only important for countries to put aside differences, it is important to rise above those differences in order to combat this, because I think we have to realize that we are all in this together.
What is your daily schedule like, Mr. Ambassador? For me, it's very hard to imagine, because you are dealing with the embassy routine work, while at the same time trying to promote China-India 70th anniversary related events and work, and at the same time dealing with a crisis, a global pandemic crisis. And this place in China, your work is extremely important for your country. So how does that work, Mr. Ambassador?
It all comes together at the end.
I'm glad you have a laughter about this.
The bilateral calendar this year started off on a very high note. There was a visit to China by a very high-ranking military officer from India, the commander of our Northern Command, visited China, met with the chief of the PLA forces, visited Chengdu, visited Urumqi, and had very good discussions. And this was in the first week of January, and we had a lot of things on the schedule. After that, we observed our National Day on the 23rd of January, which was 3 days ahead of schedule, but we had to do it because the Spring Festival was scheduled to begin on the evening of the 24th of January. Many of our students who were, and other citizens who were in Wuhan and in Hubei and wanted to be repatriated, we had to respond to their concerns at that time, because there were family members in India who were worried about their children. So together with the cooperation that we received from our colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China, we were able to operate 3 flights during the month, the end of January and the end of February, over a period of 1 month, to take out the bulk of our citizens from there. In the meantime, of course, we were also in discussions with the Chinese in terms of what kind of assistance we could offer. As I mentioned, we flew in about 15 tons of assistance on an Indian Air Force aircraft in February as our gift to the people of Wuhan and Hubei. And also, I think at the same time, China was procuring other kinds of equipment from India, and we facilitated the procurement of a lot of that equipment as well. Now, of course, we are dealing with the outbreak in India. It's still in its initial stages, but we obviously have to be prepared for the further development of this. And as I said, we are preoccupied 100% right now in meeting the needs of our medical community. And that entails a lot of procurement from India, from China, of various kinds of testing kits, of PPE kits, of ventilators, other kinds of medical equipment. And again, that is something that keeps us busy in terms of engagement not only with the authorities in the Chinese government, but also a very, very large number of companies across China in different fields. There's still some time to go before we can be certain as to when we can actually plan something or have something and start inviting people to it. That necessarily impacts the calendar for India-China at 70, as we call the 70th anniversary celebrations. What we have succeeded in so far is on designing a joint logo to mark these celebrations, and I think that is in the final stages, and we will find an appropriate occasion very soon to jointly release that logo, which will figure on all of the activities that we do. And we had when President Xi and Prime Minister Modi had met in Chennai, they had agreed that the 70th anniversary will be celebrated with 70 activities that will be conducted in both the countries, 35 in India, 35 in China. And
that's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but now I don't know that we have enough time left. But as our leaders in the communications that they exchanged just 3 days back, they committed to each other that despite the fact that we have lost time and we may not have time to do everything, we still remain committed to celebrating this occasion with the importance that it deserves, because it is a very, very significant moment for both of us.
Mr. Ambassador, all the best to you and certainly to your beloved ones.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. All the best.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have for today. To find out more, you can always find us World Inside CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook accounts. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now, and be well.